I'm here to tear Greg down.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we are back again for another episode in our Biblical Theology project. This time, we're looking to tackle Joshua 13 all the way up to 22. It's a big section, but I think that we can handle it, and I am looking forward to talking about it with these guys. And so why don't we go ahead and bring in Brother Greg. Greg, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you, Joe?
If I was any better, I'd be you, I think. So.
Not sure the scale goes that direction, but yeah, sounds good, man. Good weekend and ready to get at it.
Well, it's nice to see you as always, Brother Micah. How about you? How you doing?
I'm fine.
Just fine. All right.
He's got a heartbeat.
I'll live.
He'll live. All right. Well, it's good to see you, and I'm glad that you're doing fine. Brother Eric, how about you? I caught you with about to take a sip of coffee, like I was your waiter at a diner or something.
Well, I really didn't sleep well last night.
Just looks like
up. Thank you. Thank you for noticing that, for being hopefully understanding about it. But
You look like a wreck.
Yeah, I got only just maybe just a few hours of sleep last night, so I'm not running on all cylinders this morning. But hopefully that won't affect the show. So I'm going to do my best, and hopefully I can persevere.
Anything on your mind that you want to unburden yourself? I mean, we'd be happy to.
You can confess some sin. You can whatever.
I think I maybe drank a little bit too much caffeine too late.
The good news though is that Eric's 2 cylinders is the same thing as most men's 8 cylinders. So
that is definitely
let's hope
true.
So. Thank you for that compliment.
I'm here to build you up, Eric.
That's good.
I appreciate that.
Well,
I'm here to tear Greg down.
It's good to be clear about all of our
just fine, then.
Objectives, as we get started here. So if you're new to the show, we are going through the Bible from beginning to end. We are trying as hard as we can to talk about the section at hand and everything that's come before it, and trying as hard as possible not to run ahead to other things. And so we're trying to stick in this episode to Joshua 13 through 22. It's a bigger section than we usually handle, and if you haven't read that in a bit, we would encourage you to maybe read through it now. But I'm going to get us started about this section in general. But up until now, the text that we've been reading, especially in Joshua, has been showing us how much progress that the Israelites made under Joshua in driving out the inhabitants of the land, and then settling the land, dividing it up, and moving in. However, chapter 13 begins with a statement about how Joshua's grown old, and then there's still so much to do. How do you guys read this as we're getting into this chapter? It seems like a lot has happened, but then chapter 13 setting up, well, there's still an awful lot more to go. Any thoughts that you have about this?
The interesting thing is the emphasis upon God keeping his promises. Like he has brought them into this land, and he has given them a significant portion of it, yet there's work that remains to be done. I want us to remember that the original land deed that was promised to Abraham was like so much larger than what they've taken up to this point, but also larger than that which they would initially inhabit. So even if they were to be completely faithful and drive out every single one of the inhabitants and things like that, it seems like the way that God set this up, it was that there was room for them to grow into the land. It seems as if there was, even with the emphasis on God's faithfulness, I don't know if any of this is making sense, even with the emphasis on God's faithfulness, there was always this opportunity for more blessing in accordance with like obedience to the Lord and the land.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, as I was reading this, I just thought this had a very honest ring to it. If the writer wanted to embellish the account, he could have said something like, in a short time, Israel completely destroyed all their enemies and conquered the entire land, and it was so easy for them, and they did it in such a short period of time. I mean, if the writer wanted to embellish the story, he could have just said something like that, but instead, he says this, and this just comes off as very honest. Like, yeah, Joshua was old, and there was still a lot of land to possess. So the description is very believable, and this reminds me of God's words in Deuteronomy 7:22, where he said, "The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them quickly, for the wild beasts would grow too numerous for you." So this is actually exactly what God said would happen. He said, I'm not going to wipe everybody out instantly. You're not going to go in there and just nuke everybody and move in right away. This is going to be a process. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen quickly. And he gives a practical reason for that. So I actually think this is exactly what we should expect given the previous statements.
Isn't that an interesting concern to have too? That the wild beasts specifically will be too numerous for you. I don't think that we really grapple with that problem that much in most modern contexts. Like if you were to go in and wipe everyone out at the same time, and there were all these totally uninhabited lands because you couldn't grow into them yet, and they weren't being possessed by anybody, like you wouldn't be able to handle how many ravenous animals there were there. They would devour you. That I don't know how much this adds to the conversation, but that just seems like such a strange concern to have given our modern context. We really have no idea what it's like to live in a context like that.
And it's a realistic concern given that.
I mean, there's places in the United States where, wolves are taking over, and it's hard to, not taking over, but they are a serious concern. So yeah, that's
right.
It's outside of most of our context, especially, more urban dwellers. So, I agree with everything you guys have said. To not rehash, I guess, first of all, I just like the way it's worded. Hey, Joshua is old, and God said to him, "Hey, Joshua, you're old." Like, yeah, thanks for pointing that out, God. I appreciate it. And so to completely take this outside the context, because I don't want to rehash everything you said, I feel like this some days. The older I get, I feel like the more there is that I need to be doing and should be doing, and so I can appreciate. I appreciate Joshua's faithfulness. I appreciate probably the weariness that he feels from this old age, and can appreciate that he looks on this burden and says there's still so much more to do. And as I move into maybe the back 40 of my life, I can appreciate that more and more.
I don't have anything necessarily to add. I think you guys covered it well. So I want to ask a follow-up question. In chapter 13, verse 13, we see a statement that I think ought to catch our attention. So, especially Eric, you were bringing up God was doing exactly what he said he was going to do little by little. God has been faithful. But then this statement, I think, should catch our attention. It says, but the sons of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites or the Maacathites, for Gesher and Maacath live among Israel until this day. As we go through this whole section, and it's not, getting a demerit because I'm talking about the section that we're looking at, just, beyond chapter 13, we see a bunch of statements like this. We see it again in chapter 15, 16, 17. What purpose do statements like this make, that Israel didn't fully dispossess all the people that were in the land and that they still lived among them? What's going on here? Is that it catches my attention. Should it be putting us on the alert? I know sometimes we talk about some of these sections maybe feel a little bit more boring. Sometimes people read past this. And so in the midst of all these apportioning things, in the midst of all these victories and geographical locations, we just get statements like this dropped in fairly frequently, actually, at least the way I read it. What do you think about this?
I think for the first part, it's just an accurate record of what was. But beyond that, I think this should signal, at least to us as we're reading about this later, a possible future tension, and if, as we read the text, current falling short of the people. This isn't going exactly the way God planned, and so that we should anticipate some tension brewing in the future.
Yeah, and I think that specifically the verse that you're talking about in chapter 15. About the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah could not drive them out. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. I'm going to try not to get demerits and run way ahead of where we are. But it's interesting how God weaves this whole story together. Because this people's unfaithfulness leads to, in some areas, leads to these people remaining in the land. They end up being thorns in their side. They end up being the cause of much stumbling, I think that's what this is anticipating. They're going to end up being the cause of much stumbling. But it's also, it's leaving a problem to solve that perhaps we're going to see God send someone who actually solves this problem for his people. Perhaps we'll see some sort of a deliverer who maybe we'll actually take Jerusalem. we'll actually conquer that people and deliver God's people from that influence. So I think that the way it's introducing a tension into the story. Yes, they've been unfaithful. Yes, this is going to cause problems, but it's also making way for what God will do in the future for his people.
Yeah, I think all those things are true. This just goes to show that God was right all along. When he told the Israelites, make sure that you wipe out these groups, and then they don't wipe them out, we're going to find that God gave those warnings for a reason. It wasn't just for its own sake. It was to protect Israel. As God said, like again, going back to Deuteronomy 7, if you don't wipe these people out, they will turn your hearts away from following me. And well, I don't want to give anything away, but we already read in Deuteronomy 31 where God said, make sure that you obey me when you go into the land. And then he turns around and tells Moses, they're not going to obey me when they go into the land. So, I mean, God is warning them for a reason. He's giving them warnings, not just to add a burden on them, but because they really do need to obey these things for their own well-being.
God clearly told them what was going to happen. And so that's why I think it should be catching our attention. We talked a lot about foreknowledge and whatever else. But for us, even just as we're reading through this, I think that we can have foreknowledge that although we haven't read what comes after this, these verses telling us that these people were not driven out of the land, that this wasn't fully, I just think, priming us that, unless God's wrong, which none of us think he's going to be, there's going to be problems that are going to come from this, whether sooner or later. And so it's one of those things that I think that it's called pearling. We get these little passages that are dropped along, or breadcrumbs maybe is a more modern way of talking about that. And so it catches my attention, but I think you guys covered it very well. So I got nothing else to add beyond that.
Well, I got another question. Joshua 13:14 says that the offerings by fire were Levi's inheritance. But then in verse 33, it says, the Lord is their inheritance. And then later in Joshua 18:7, which we'll get to that chapter here shortly, it says the priesthood of the Lord is their inheritance. So why describe Levi's inheritance in these different ways? Why not just state it as one thing and nothing else?
Once again, the question we have to ask is, why did the priesthood exist? And what were the whole burnt offerings facilitating? And then you start to see a significant amount of overlap between the Lord himself being their inheritance, the offerings by fire being their inheritance, and the priesthood being their inheritance. What the offerings and the priesthood were ultimately facilitating is fellowship with God. We talked a lot about the communal meal aspect of the sacrificial system as we were walking through Leviticus. There was some discussion about whether that was, exactly the best way to understand it and stuff like that. I think once again, that this kind of shows that the Lord is their inheritance, and that's why the offerings by fire are their inheritance. The Lord is their inheritance, and that's why the priesthood is their inheritance, because it's about fellowship with him. It's about communion with him and dwelling with God. So all of those things are perfectly in sync to me.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to give the same answer, but maybe I just phrase it a little bit differently. If someone were to say to me that the Lord is their inheritance, I might go, well, what does that mean? Or what do you mean by that? Does nobody else get God, but they get God? Well, the Lord is their inheritance in this respect, in this way. They have the priesthood. They have the responsibility and the relationship of bringing people close to God and atoning for sin as they participate in the sacrificial offering. They get not the leftovers, but they get to eat the food that comes out of that. And so what does it mean that the Lord is their inheritance in some way other than everybody else who in a sense the Lord is their inheritance? Well, in this way. And so I find no problem with it being pictured or explained or demonstrated. What does it mean that the Lord is their inheritance?
I have a follow-up question for Greg. Do you think that the Lord is the priest's inheritance in a way that is like escalated or special or unique from the rest of the people at this point in redemptive history?
Well,
do you think that
to the degree that they have these things and the other people don't, but just because you're a priest, see Nadab and Abihu, doesn't mean that you have some unrestricted access that nobody else gets. And so Goodness, you're asking me to get a demerit to answer this question.
I actually wasn't trying to send you there, but
eschatologically, I do not think the priesthood has any better, greater, more inheritance of God than anybody else would. In time, in the system that was visibly, manifestly here temporally, I'd say that they get to go in, they get to minister directly to God, and that is the inheritance that they get perpetually unless something changes. This is their inheritance. Now, wrapped up in that was they had certain land, they had certain cities that couldn't be trespassed upon, couldn't be sold, couldn't be traded. We read all that. And so eschatologically, no. In time, yeah, and I think that's displayed through what we've read already.
I'm just thinking about, I guess what I was thinking about is the fact that they actually get to go before the throne of grace in a very, like, obviously God restricts that. God restricts that and says, you're going to do it how I say you're going to do it.
In time, during their service.
There, you know.
In time, during their service. Is everything that's associated with the earthly priesthood is theirs. Eschatologically, I have no reason yet to think that there is some hierarchy. You know, I think of the famous quotes between Whitefield and oh goodness, help
Wesley.
me out. Wesley, you know, where Whitefield says, I don't think I'm going to see Wesley in heaven because he's going to be so much closer to the throne of grace. You know, I'll never lay eyes on him. Well, I think that was cute. I think it's kind and it's gracious. I don't even know that Whitefield believed that. He was just trying to make a point. And so do I think that someday in eternity, the priesthood are going to have it better than other believers? I don't have any reason to make that case at this point.
I'm not really adding to anything except maybe explaining it using hopefully maybe a little bit clearer, simpler words that,
sorry.
Well,
he's not saying anything different, Greg, just better.
Just better. A lot better. I mean simpler. So in a sense, the priests got to draw nearer to God than other people, you know, and draw near in the sense that they were serving God in this unique way. Other people didn't, they were not able to do that. And again, I'm talking, like you said, Greg, so is that more clear? It's crystal clear now. It was very obscure before. It's crystal clear now. The clarity is shining through. So anyway, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, the only thing I would add, I think, basically, as I'm listening to all you guys, unless I'm misunderstanding, and I don't know how I could, with it being as crystal clear as it was, that I tend to read this as a further explanation of, you know, the general inheritance that they have. Of course, these are all related to the Lord and the sacrifices, and all this stuff is tied together. But even if you separated them and said that your inheritance is comprised of these various components, I would see no difficulty with understanding that it's not like any of those things are antithetical or contradictory to each other. So, you know, they have a different inheritance than the others. Whether it's better or worse, I suppose, is, you know, I'm not trying to go into, what some of the issues, maybe that Micah's follow-up question was about, you know, beyond this life or something like that. But in this, their role was very important, and it was good for them to do these things. And this was given to them, and it wasn't given to anybody else. So nobody else was supposed to do these things. And you know, Greg, even as you mentioned, like with Nadab and Abihu, even if they did these things, but they did them wrong, they had no ability to do them however they wanted. This was a very important role for everybody, and the land was for everybody, but so is the worship of God through these sacrificial system and all this other stuff. And so it all works together and everybody has their part to play. And so they need to take that very seriously. Let's move into chapter 14. I'm always interested, I think, in how the Bible describes people. Sometimes we get a description of someone that they were wicked or evil, and sometimes you get long descriptions, sometimes you get short descriptions. But in Joshua chapter 14, we see that Joshua describes himself in verse 8 and then Caleb in verse 14 as people who followed God fully. That's a brief but powerful description. And so I'm just wondering, what does that mean? And I don't know. I think like if I've told you guys before, I'm glad that my life isn't recorded in Scripture, but this would be a nice one. If someone wrote about my life and they said, Joe followed God fully, I sure would be happy if that's how the Holy Spirit inspired my life to be described. So what do you guys think about this description? What does it mean? Is there any, can we unpack it? It seems like this is a very full definition, but again, how do you guys read this?
So this is referring to a very specific instance, right? It's referring to when the spies came back and his brothers made the heart of the people melt through their bad report, which is obviously that was what precipitated the wandering in the wilderness and things like that. So
do you think I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but do you think it's restricted to that? I mean, certainly it includes that, but
yeah.
You think he's only talking about that, or is it describe their life in totality?
Yeah. Not exclusively. I think that's probably the bullseye of what he's talking about. That's like the example that showed the totality of his life as one of faithfulness to the Lord. And then Caleb is in the same category there. I think that also shows us certain things about, once again, like be strong and courageous is one of the main injunctions or commands that we see in this book. It shows us something about the connection between courage and obedience to God. The rest of the people failed in their courage because they saw the task in front of them and they're like, no, we're not going to believe God's word. So courage, trust in the Lord, obedience to God, that's all part and parcel of what it means to follow the Lord fully.
Yeah. I think there's an important distinction to be made between perfectly, or maybe we'd say inerrantly, and fully, faithfully, to the best of your ability. And so I would look at Joshua's life in general, and I would look at it in particular, and Caleb's life in particular in this instance. They did what they were told. They obeyed. They were faithful. Now, does that mean that entire trip into the land they never did anything wrong? That's not the point trying to be made. That's not the argument. The argument is we did what we were told. We walked with God. We seek to please him. We seek to honor him. We believed what he said. And so, yeah, Joe, I've known you only 15 years or so, but man, if I get the chance to decide what goes on your gravestone, yeah, it'll be follow God completely. Follow God fully. So.
Well, certainly, yes, not sinlessly, but
No.
I do think that this is a mark that we can achieve. Like if we were aiming for sinlessly, I mean, I've already blown that, and we all have, but fully, I think, is a mark that we can hit, and it definitely seems like the example that you're describing, Micah, is, I mean, a huge one. But I think of even just Joshua's life before that too. I mean, he seemed like he was just so fully devoted to the Lord, not leaving the tent of meeting. He was with Moses all the time. And so this does just seem like it's much bigger. And I appreciated the courage and the strength, and these are wonderful things. So I'm not sure that would be apt on my gravestone, but if I die before you, if you make that push, I won't try and fight against you from beyond the grave. But Eric, what do you think about this? Any thoughts to add to the conversation?
Well, I think both Greg and Micah are right. What Micah said was pretty much what I was thinking. Not only did Joshua and Caleb, not only did they, go into the promised land and take possession of the land, but even before that, they trusted that God would give them the victory. They didn't stumble in the way that the other Israelites did, whose hearts melted. So this didn't just, it wasn't like they were just going through the motions. They were obedient also from their hearts. This is obviously not talking about sinless perfection, because that's way beyond what this is saying. But it's just saying, like, they trusted God through it all. They even when he told them, go into the land and spy out the land and then bring the report back, even after that report, Caleb and Joshua still trusted the Lord and said, yeah, we're going to take the land. God's going to help us take it. And I think what Micah said was really good. He was mentioning how that one instance was sort of a reflection of their whole lives. Like it was a sampling of the way their lives were consistently. So that's the way that I look at it.
Right on. Well, you want to take us on to our next question then, Eric?
Yeah. So my question comes from Joshua 15. So we're in a new chapter here. Jacob prophesied earlier that Judah was the tribe from which the kings of Israel would come. That's how I understand Genesis 49:10. And then here in Joshua 15, we read that Jerusalem is within the land of Judah. And interestingly enough, Melchizedek reigned as king and priest of God in Jerusalem for this was centuries earlier. You read about that in Genesis 14:18. My question to you guys is, do you think this is just a coincidence, or was this by design? Or is this, am I just going down a rabbit trail? Now, before I go any further, I just want to, for our viewers' sake, I want to make this clear, and Greg pointed this out, and he's right about this. There is some debate, I don't know how much, but there is some debate about whether Salem in Genesis 14:18 is the same as Jerusalem in Joshua 15:8. I'm personally convinced that it's very likely that it is the same place, but if you read about this online, there will be some people that will say, no, these are two different places. They're both within Israel. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But there is some dispute about this. The guy, one of the scholars that had suggested that Jerusalem and Salem were not the same place, also claimed that Melchizedek was not even a historical person. So, I don't know all of the. I know some of the arguments. I don't know all of them. My point with all this is that I still have some studying to do. But what do you guys think about this? Because this, if Jerusalem and Salem are the same place, to me this just seems like an incredible coincidence.
Well, yeah. So I pointed out that I just happened to be working on another project that dealt with Melchizedek and his priesthood and his kingship. And so as part of my reading there, came across the fact that some scholars, whether they all deny the
I'm not saying all deny that.
Melchizedek. No. Yeah, I have no idea. Just pointed out that, hey, it might not be perfectly safe to assume that Salem, from which Melchizedek is assigned as being the king of, and Jerusalem may not be the same places. And so I said, well, so I guess I don't want to jump to that conclusion. If it is the case, is it a coincidence? Well, I don't know. Probably not. What should I do with that? Well, I guess I don't want to do a whole lot with it. I don't know what value. If it is or isn't a coincidence, does that change anything else that I'm going to read from this point on, or from the beginning of Genesis forward? I don't know. And so I want to be careful not to find those interesting details, and if I connect the dots just right, it makes a really interesting constellation.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I'm sure you are. That's your. No, it's not your.
I do want to do that.
So you go ahead. You go ahead and do it.
That's my goal.
I will be the more faithful Bible expositor, and I'll allow you to do your.
My lack of faithfulness is causing me to go down this rabbit trail.
So yeah, if some point, because I don't see it yet, but if there comes a point in the text where that connection becomes significant, I will be happy to embrace it.
So it's very hard for me to answer this question without hopping down the demerit trail.
Hop away, brother. Hop away.
Greg's always there to egg me on. So I do think it's significant, at least, that Judah was promised the royal line, and Jerusalem, which, there's going to be incredible significance to later on. It happens to be within the land of Judah, and if Melchizedek and all that we know that he ends up being later on is from this same city, that does seem to present an interesting typological picture. But I need to stop there.
And I would just say maybe.
That's fair.
So this would be an interesting thing to bookmark and come back to.
Yeah, and before I share my my conspiracy theory answer, I just want to.
Don't you want to get Joe's wrong answer before you give your right answer?
Joe doesn't give wrong answers. He just
that's very kind.
So he's going to agree with you then.
Joe's cautious about these things, and he's more cautious than I am. And I'm not, like, the point I'm trying to make is, I am not at all certain about what I'm about to say. I am not at all certain.
Clip that and turn it into a short.
So I could be dead wrong on, and some of these things are just totally speculative. So I want to make that clear. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to be the conspiracy guy, but there's a few things I can't share everything because I would be treading into demerit territory. But I'll just say a few things. I don't want to take too much time with this, but I think it's interesting that the king of Jerusalem's name, Adonai-Zedek, from Joshua 10:1, is similar to Melchizedek or Melchizedek. Their names are similar. It kind of points to the fact that possibly, Adonai-Zedek and Melchizedek were kings from the same country, kings over the same kingdom. Doesn't prove anything, of course, but it's just something to think about. And Salem and Jerusalem are similar as well. So again, there's a lot more to it than that. I don't believe these are coincidences. I would have to share a lot more to make a stronger case. But my theory so far, and again, this is only a theory, is that Salem, aka Jerusalem, and the entire land of Canaan was set apart by God for a divine purpose long before Israel was a nation, and even before the time of Abraham. And why this particular land was set apart, I really don't know. I have a suspicion that I can't get into right now, partly because I haven't studied it enough, and partly because it's somewhat of a rabbit trail. But when the inhabitants of Canaan became really wicked, God wanted to replace them with people that he could use to fulfill his purposes. We read that in Genesis 15:16. I think this is why God chose Israel. I think that God, for some reason, had this land of Canaan set aside for a particular purpose, perhaps specifically the land of Jerusalem. There was something to this. I don't know exactly what it was. Just a hint, Joe, the video you sent me a while ago.
Just say it. I mean, it's all right. You could speculate. You've already tiptoed around enough that it's speculative. Just let people know what you're at least investigating.
Unless it's Gnostic knowledge. And
no, this isn't. We're not getting into Gnostic territory here. I mean, it's possible, and again, I don't know. There's some evidence, some theories that the land of Canaan may have been where the Garden of Eden was. I don't know for sure if that's the case. There is some dispute about that. There's some debate about how to interpret the geography of the earlier chapters of Genesis that describe the location of the Garden of Eden. There's more than one way to interpret that. But anyway, even if that's not true, even if it's not the place where the Garden of Eden was, the point is, God had his eyes set on this land. He had this land set apart. Melchizedek was there. Apparently, there was a righteous kingdom there at one time. And so, for some reason, it's like he has his eyes fixed on this land. Remember, he's speaking as if sin in the land of Canaan is almost like different or more severe than sin in other lands. And so he's removing the Canaanites. He's working to put Israel into the land, and he wants the land to be righteous. He wants to use it to fulfill his purposes. And this might play into why God is promising the land forever. So again, I'm getting into some speculation here. I don't know for sure,
or it might all be hogwash.
He might, yeah. Well, in full disclosure, he said that I sent him some video. I wasn't promoting this idea to him.
No, I know.
But Eric he's made little statements, around about why is God interested in this land. And I encountered a video of a conversation between people that was speculating that this was possibly where Eden was. And so I sent it to Eric saying, is this what you've been talking about all along, or is it something else? And he confirmed that that was at least what some of his suspicion was. So it is an interesting speculation. I have no way of proving or disproving it, currently at this point. And so I wouldn't advocate for it, but it would certainly at least answer that question. Just because it would answer, it doesn't mean that it's the right answer, but it would answer why God would be so particularly interested in this, this particular place. Is it a coincidence? I mean, I don't know. It seems like God inspired these things to be recorded. We had some other conversations before about like Jasher and Enoch and other extra canonical books, non-canonical books. If God is choosing to include something in Scripture, of course there's significance for it and there's reason for that. And of course God is not beyond drawing connections where they might not seem immediately obvious. So I would keep the idea that God is doing something purposeful in bringing these connections out, especially if he makes those connections more clear down the road. But anyway, I think it's an interesting conversation. The other speculation could wildly drag us into a different topic matter. I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you brought it up, I don't know if we could. That's one of those things like you were just say what you're talking about, and then we can move on.
Well,
I hope I wasn't trying to get you to. I understand you don't fully, that you don't subscribe to that, but that's what you are at least wrestling through and considering.
I don't want to come off as one of those guys that says things like, well, the Nephilim traveled to their planet and they're coming back in the end times. I mean, I don't want to.
You don't say that out loud.
It might increase our viewership on the podcast.
I don't want to come off as one of those guys. I am holding
people
this,
like that get a lot more views.
I'm holding this very loosely.
To sound crazy,
but here you go.
Crazy.
Anyway, I was trying to be cautious, but Joe dragged me.
That was all Joe's fault.
I think you're being caught. I think
beyond the boundary of caution.
I'm way beyond that now.
I just wanted everybody to know where he's actually meddling around in. So he's. I didn't drag him out there. He was already out there. I said, "Is that what you're doing?" And he said, "Yes, it is." So
well, now that we're all sufficiently concerned about Eric,
I'm not concerned. Like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can move on.
All right. Well, I'm going to move us into chapter 17. Yeah, we're going to skip 16, but move us into chapter 17. Specifically zooming in on verse 13 of that chapter. It came about when the sons of Israel became strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Now, again, this isn't what was supposed to happen, but this is what did happen. There was a point in time which they weren't strong enough to do anything. They became stronger, and they did this instead of killing them, driving them out, putting them to the sword, as they were originally commanded to do. And so that, regardless of what should they have done, my question's more on what could they have done. If they were originally told to eradicate this people, drive them out of the land, but they didn't do that, is there an indefinite, always open time clock? Because this promise happened, or this command, go in and do this thing, is the door forever and always open for them to go on? Now we're ready. And could it be done this year? Could it be done 50 years from now, 100 years from now? Or was there a window which you should have done this, but now that opportunity's passed you?
I think that the command to drive out the inhabitants of the land stands as long as the old covenant stands. This is obviously my broader understanding of the connection between the biblical covenants is going to come into play here. I think it stands as long as old covenant stands. I think later on you might see people who in faithfulness end up defeating some of these enemies, relying on the Lord about how and when to go about it. But I think that this was supposed to be the possession of this people, so it stands as long as that covenant stands. And then if a change in covenant happens, then we have to see where we go from there.
This is kind of a difficult question to answer as I look at what other verses say. And I brought this up several times before, but I'll just bring it up again. So I wonder how we can reconcile this passage with, for example, Genesis 9:25, where Noah curses the Canaanites essentially and says that they're going to become the slaves of their brothers. And of course, Israel was one of the brothers. And so I think that anticipates that not all of the Canaanites are going to be killed. They're not all going to be driven out, but they're going to be slaves of the Israelites. And then I think about too, like, there are, as we go through Joshua, maybe, and you guys have no doubt picked up on this, and that's not even just in Joshua, but there's also passages in the law where utter destruction language has to be hyperbolic. It can't be literal. I think what I would say is, what I think God really did not want was a situation in which the Canaanites were in the land and they were basically free to do what they wanted to do. Because if they were free to do what they wanted to do, then they would have certainly they would have continued in idolatry. They would have been a thorn in Israel's side. They would have led Israel astray. So I think that in certain cases, yes, when God says annihilate them, I mean, if you're not gonna take them as slaves, you need to annihilate them, or drive them out, or just get them out of the land completely. So if they couldn't do that, if they couldn't drive them out, kill them, or enslave them, then there was going to be a problem.
Let me follow up with that. So with that interpretation, does verse 13 of chapter 17 satisfy the original, in your mind, in your the position you're espousing? Does verse 13 of chapter 17 satisfy the original intention that God had when he sent them into the land?
That verse makes it sound as if they chose an option that was not the ideal expected outcome. So like it sounds like they were supposed to drive them out. That was the ideal. But then again, what do you do then with, again, passages like Genesis 9:25? I don't know. Honestly, I'm trying to take every verse into consideration here. I'm trying to figure out, how far do we take some of these verses. But in the verse that you mentioned, it does sound like driving them out was what was expected.
Okay.
And taking them as forced laborers was kind of, it was not the worst thing that could have happened, but it was certainly not preferred.
Okay, let's say we swallow all of that whole. Have you answered the time clock? Quite like, is driving them out, taking them as slaves, or annihilating them, whether those are all legitimate under the original structure or not? Is there a time clock on those things?
I mean, like I said, God said, I'm going to do this little by little. What does that mean? Well, I mean, it sounds like there was time to wage war later on, if need be. And we'll see that Israel will wage war on and on and on.
And we still do, right? So is whatever action we take today legitimate on its face? Because
that's a different question.
I meant it to be kind of the same question. Is there ever a time clock? The annihilation, slavery, or driving out, is there ever a point at which we say, hey, listen, we're past that?
Well, my initial thought was kind of like what Micah said. I mean, these are Old Covenant specific things. At least that's the way that I've understood them. Does this need to be done today? I would say probably not, but I guess there's always the other argument on the other side. But my initial thought is no. This is an Old Covenant law, and it should be kept within the boundaries of the Old Covenant.
Yeah, this is a very, very interesting question. As I read this, I just read this as they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and so the time clock thing had never really entered my mind. But obviously, that's what you're asking, and so I agree with what has been said. I mean, I think they were supposed to do it as soon as they could. They didn't do it as soon as they could. I think that's what's being recorded here. But should it still be happening, or certainly should anybody else be trying to help them do this right now? I don't think so. I think this is, however long the clock would have gone, I think it's over now because the Old Covenant is no longer in force as we sit here in history. Interestingly enough, Eric, the only part of your description that I get uncomfortable with is the use of hyperbolic. I don't think it's hyperbolic. I understand your argument, and you gave a talk recently where you made that argument. And I think I end up in almost the same place. I just wouldn't use that particular word. We had some other conversation about the interpretation of what utterly destroy means, and it doesn't necessarily mean annihilation. And so if you drive them out, that is utterly destroying them from the land. And we've seen threats that God makes for his own people, saying, if you don't obey me, I will utterly destroy you. But he doesn't mean that he's going to annihilate them. He means he's going to completely drive them out. And so by making them forced laborers, that's not what God said to do. And interestingly, on Joshua 17:13, I know the Septuagint isn't like the final answer or something like that, but it translates this as saying, and it came to pass that when the children of Israel were strong, they made the Canaanites subject, but they did not utterly destroy them. And so the New American Standard says, but did not drive them out. That's equating those two things. And so the forced slavery, or making them forced laborers, was not what they should have done. They should have either killed them or driven them out. And in doing so, that would have been utterly destroying them from the land. And they could have gone, the survivors could have left the land and gone and established some civilization somewhere else, but they weren't supposed to be in the land, because if they remain in the land, they're going to be, they're going to be a thorn in their side and cause them either to, sin or have constant warfare with them, or whatever it is that's going to happen. Like, it's not going to be good for them to remain in the land. So the time clock, whatever it was, it doesn't seem like they were operating according to it. They should have done something differently than they did. And that's what I think a statement like this, and some of the other ones that I asked about earlier, is the point of it. So that's at least how I read it.
All right, we can move on to another question. My question is, do verses 14 through 18 describe a plan B? In other words, should the house of Joseph, which was Ephraim and Manasseh, should they have been content with the land they were originally allotted? Because in this case, they're saying, well, we want more land. It seems to be what they were after. Should they have been content, or were they asking for too much? Because it almost sounds to me like, Joshua says, well, hey, there's other land you can take over if you want. You're going to have to, put some Canaanites to death to do it, but there is more land available. What do you guys think about that? Like, how were they acting wrongly to ask that, or what are your thoughts?
So I don't think that they're acting wrongly. I also don't think there's any reason to see it as a plan B. Once again, there's room in the land for them to grow into it as more peoples are conquered and things like that. So I don't think there's any reason to describe it as that. I do want to make a point about how massive of a plot of land they actually needed, though. The allotment to Manasseh, it seems like most of this had to obviously it's Ephraim and Manasseh, as the text says. It seems like it was more significant for Manasseh for some reason, because I'm just looking at one of the maps in my Bible here, and I'm going to assume that it's right, because I don't know biblical geography like these people do. But it literally, what was originally allotted to them is on the west side of the Jordan River, in the northwest, and he literally gives them a plot from south of Issachar, north of Benjamin and Dan, and it's from the Jordan all the way to the Mediterranean. There is a massive plot of land that this is referring to. So, and I think that probably reflects the need that this massive tribe had. Remember, this is these are two half tribes, right? So it makes sense that the need for them would be greater. So I think
two half tribes that received quite a unique blessing, right, in the past.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's very possible that this was a legitimate need.
Yeah.
So I have another question about that, and maybe, well, it's actually the next question on the list. Maybe I'll tie these two questions together, if that's okay with you guys.
Do it.
So according to verse 9 of Joshua 19, the share of the sons of Judah was too large for them. Now, okay, well, what's the big deal with that? So their inheritance, each inheritance was determined by lot. Their inheritance, maybe I'm misreading this, so I want to see what you guys think. Their inheritance was determined by lot. In Joshua 15, verse 1, it says, "Now the lot for the tribe of the sons of Judah, according to their families, reached the border of Edom, southward to the wilderness of Zin at the extreme south." So it's like this is being determined by lot. And the lot was supposed to be, and this maybe is the part that we may have differences of opinion on this. This lot was supposed to be from the Lord. That's at least the way that I understand it. Like in Joshua 18, verse 6, "You shall describe the land in 7 divisions and bring the description here to me. I will cast lots for you here before the Lord our God." It almost sounds as if he was casting the lots before the Lord, so the Lord would perhaps bring about the intended outcome. And then in 1951, something very similar is said. It says, "These are the inheritances which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the households of the tribes of the sons of Israel distributed by lot in Shiloh before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting." So they finished dividing the land. Now, there's more than one way to interpret the statement, "They cast the lot before the Lord." But I guess my question is, if casting the lot is always determined by the Lord, then how could there be a situation in which the sons of Judah had a land that was way too large for them, so much so that the tribe of, I think it was Simeon, was placed like in their midst? Please make sense of this. I'm not entirely sure how to take this. I'm open to different interpretations.
Perhaps the initial casting of lots was just for the sort of initial arrangement, and then there was freedom from that point on. And obviously, I think this is all in the providence of God, but there's freedom from that point on to make adjustments according to the need. Perhaps that's what's in view here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the initial boundary lines were drawn up as they were drawn up, and then the lot was cast for who got what section, right? Isn't that so? I'm not convinced that the initial boundary lines and how people marked out the territory was divinely inspired, like in the same sense that who got which lot was or wasn't divinely inspired when they cast lots.
Right. Well, that's my question: is like how specific were these lots? How did this even work? I guess is the main question, because it sounds to me like what you said makes perfect sense, Greg. It sounds to me like it's not.
It seems like they were dividing
specific.
Yeah, they were dividing up territory, and they went, "Hey, listen, you've taken more than you need or more than is good for you, and someone over here needs a little bit more, so here we're going to carve you out a chunk from their territory, from the umbrella that is them."
And that makes sense.
Yeah, this is, a very interesting question. Casting lots is so foreign to me. The closest I've ever gotten is if you can't come up with something. Well, no, that's different purpose. I've never done that thinking that was from the Lord. No, you flip a coin or something, right? You can't figure out what to do. And so they were supposed to cast a lot for the scapegoat, right? They had the two goats, and one was supposed to be killed and one was supposed to be thrown out, sent out, not thrown out, but sent out to the wilderness. And so they were to cast a lot for that. It's kind of like flipping a coin, right? I don't know. This is so much more significant, and it's not just an A or B kind of thing. It's this apportioning of the land. And your question, I'd never picked up this detail until you pointed out, so I appreciate it. But I don't know what to make of this. I can't remember. Maybe you guys can remember. Were they ever told that they were supposed to cast lots for the inheritance, or did they just say, we're going to cast lots before the Lord and do it? Like, was this... And I don't know that would answer the question, but I don't remember them being told by the Lord to cast lots, but maybe they were. Again, this is not something that has really caught my radar. So maybe you guys remember if something that I'm forgetting. But if God told them to cast lots for it, then they're doing it. Then that's a different kind of scenario than them just saying, well, we're here. And then they cast lots. And then, maybe, because Greg, you at least said, well, maybe that wasn't divinely inspired. That would be much more possible to me if they weren't directly commanded by the Lord to do it this way. So,
my question on what was or wasn't divinely inspired wasn't so much the lots, though we could talk about that. It was, where were the lines exactly as they went out? You said, go out there, look at the land, survey it, mark up areas, come back. And in my mind, that would help with a little bit of honesty, right? Like if I was drawing up the lines and I didn't know exactly which land I was going to get when the lots were cast, I'd probably be a little bit more equitable, if you will. But if I knew ahead of time, like, well, I'm taking this, and we're going to gerrymander over here, and I'm going to get all the good spots. So
we do that with our kids. If there's like one piece of garlic bread left or something, somebody makes the cuts, and then somebody else gets to pick who gets which piece.
I get to pick who gets which piece.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. I'm not adding anything to it, so I can't clear it up for you for sure. If there was a passage that I missed that they were commanded to do it this way, Otherwise, I mean, Greg, your description sure makes sense. Look at the land, divide it in a way that makes sense, and then they divvy it up by lot to make sure that there was no, if there's certainly the people thought that that was the Lord giving them an answer. Whether it actually was, lots is one of those things, especially for non-biblical people, even a lot of modern Christians, they look at some of this stuff and if they feel it was, I don't know, there's some strange things that we don't practice that seem almost superstitious, to many people. And casting of lots is one of those areas. And I just don't have a great answer here. So if it was from the Lord, it does seem odd that someone would get a piece of land that was too small and someone else would get a piece of land that was too large, and then they'd say, "Oh, this is too large, so here, take a piece of it." But that could have been in the providence of God. The willingness to expand it or to give away some is an interesting caveat on its own. But it seems like if God was doing this on purpose, that He would have given them the pieces of land that seemed most appropriate. But that, I don't know that that's a fair assumption to make, really. So yeah, it's a great question.
Without God saying, here's where the lines are, it seems like He was giving them the liberty to divide these things to some extent, as long as everyone got some. And so I guess I don't want to read too much or more into it or try to extract more out of it than is meant to be.
Well, what we've already said too is that the land, it's not like this version of the land was the final, version anyway. Like the land was the boundaries of the lands were, were going to be changing anyway, and Israel was going to be growing as a nation. So, you could simply make the case that even if some of these areas were too big for certain tribes or too small, this wasn't like the final outcome, the final permanent outcome anyway. So it could just be something simple like that. Appreciate your guys' input. So I have a question about Joshua chapter 20. The chapter mentions the cities of refuge. We've talked about cities of refuge before. This is not the first time. So does Joshua 20 shed any more light on these cities, on their purpose, on how the manslayer was supposed to, go about entering the city? Like, what do you guys think about that?
I didn't have any new insights as I read this. I thought that what we had discussed before, I wasn't surprised by anything that I was reading here again, or I didn't feel like I got any new information. So if there's other insight that you guys gleaned, I'd be happy to hear it, but I don't have anything to add.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only thing we really get is the names of the exact cities, right? Do we get I don't know that we got those before, but having read this so many times, maybe it's all baked in the cake anyway, and I'm not distinguishing. But
yeah, that seems like that's new. Like these are the specific places. Yeah. So before it was when you get there, you're gonna do this. Now they're doing it, and these are the ones. But as far as the purpose for them goes, maybe I'm missing some detail that Eric's trying to pull out of us.
Eric.
But, but I don't have it.
Well, according to the internet.
That's an academic citation right there.
It is. So this
according to dem internets.
So Joshua 20 provides specific details about the implementation of cities of refuge not found in earlier texts, and to be more specific, such as the formal spoken legal procedure at the city gate, and of course, as you guys already said, the explicit naming of the cities that were set apart for this purpose. So I think Joshua 20 focuses more on the practical application of the law, whereas the earlier texts are more so about like just kind of the general idea, the general purpose of these things. So
yeah, procedurally, I mean, we might get a little more detail, like this is the place you go to and those things. Yeah, those. But I mean, that's not adding anything to the purpose, right? The purpose is still exactly what we thought.
No, the purpose is the same. That doesn't change. It's just how a person might go about getting this process started once they reach the city gate. I guess that's the only thing. That's the only major thing.
Well, once again, we can all say thank you, internet. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Joshua 21, I got a question. Verses 43 through 45 say, that God gave Israel all the land he had promised them. But other verses say that Israel did not possess all the land. We've already talked about Joshua 13. Even later in Joshua 23, it says there was still much land to be possessed. So is Joshua 21, 43 through 45, is it speaking hyperbolically? Is it simply like, is there another point that it's trying to make? Is there any other way to understand these texts? Because I've heard people, and I myself even have used these verses maybe possibly in a way that was not correct. But some people would say, well, look, Israel got all the land according to these verses, and therefore, like, there was, like, God's promises to them were fully fulfilled right at this time. But then I read, like, the next chapter, and it's like, no, and we've already read earlier chapters that make it sound like that was just not the case. How do you guys interpret this?
Yeah, I don't take this as a statement about the geographical extent of what land was or wasn't conquered in that moment. More about the total faithfulness of God. God has done as he has said he would do. Is there still more to do? Yep, there's still more to do. But that doesn't mean he's fallen short of anything. So I don't, because for exactly the conundrum you create, if you hold that the land that they possessed at that point in the timeline was the full extent of everything he promised, well, no, it wasn't. If you're going to take that view, you suddenly have to go back and rewrite the expectations that we read earlier. And so I read this more as God faithfully delivered on every promise that he'd made. Are there more promise? Is there more still promised? Yes.
When you get to this point, there is something significant that has happened. The land has been apportioned, it's been allotted, it's being indwelt, and they're settled there. So you can say, in a certain sense, that they have moved in, and the emphasis is on the faithfulness of God. That doesn't mean that there wasn't more that could be accomplished. You don't have to make that jump.
Yeah, I do make that jump. I think that this is related to so many of the things that we've discussed before. I think that this is another area where God gave it to them and they didn't take it all. Like, they didn't do everything right. So if there's any question about, why doesn't it look like maybe the fullness, it's not because God has been unfaithful on his end, but we've seen so many statements where they didn't do what they ought to have done. And so I feel like the initial coming into the land, God gave it to them, and only Joshua and Caleb wanted to take it, and they didn't take it. And so it's not that God didn't give it to them. He did. They didn't take it. And so then they didn't receive this, and that's why that generation had to die out in the wilderness. And then God gave it to the next generation. But God's part was already done. He was happy to give it to them 40 years earlier, I think, if they would have received it. And so God has given it to them now, and then, same thing. Like, they weren't strong enough, but then they grew strong, and then they didn't utterly destroy them, or they didn't drive them out. Instead, they did something else. I think that affects how things go. And so, if the other conversations we've had, if my view is correct, which I'm not saying that it is, but just as I'm working through these things in my mind, that God does have a ideal way that things could go, and then, people can fight against that, can, thwart not the ultimate purpose necessarily, but they can, like, sin does actually fight against what God's design really is, then this would fit very neatly into a description like that God gave it to them, but the reason that there's so much more to go, not that, and Greg, I agree fully with the first part of your comment. Like, of course, there's still more unfolding, but I think at this point they could have done better than they did. They could have done it differently than they did, and we're getting.
Yeah, I don't
again,
think
that purling
disagree.
or those.
I don't think I disagree with that at all.
Sure.
If I sound like I was, I'm not. Yeah.
No, I didn't think. I'm just saying it slightly differently. That I do
More
think
clearly.
that they could have crystal clear. I do think that they could have. God gave it to them, and they could have had more, and they didn't for whatever reason.
Do you think that's the emphasis, though, in verse 43? It seems like what's being emphasized in verse 43 is the Lord gave it to them and they took possession of it. It doesn't seem like the emphasis is on, well, God gave it to them and they could have had more, but they didn't really do what they're supposed to do. It seems like the emphasis is twofold. The Lord gave it to them, they took possession of. I don't know if it fits as neatly into that paradigm as you're
Well,
saying.
they
But
did
we
take
just-
possession of it, but we have all these other qualifying statements that we've read before it that they didn't fully drive. Like they took possession of it, but they didn't drive these people out. And so like there are. Yeah, I think there's more to it. Is that the emphasis of it? No. I mean, is this like the main go-to?
And that's why I said
but
I think the emphasis more about God providing than it is about them doing, because we've just read all these caveats that said, well, they didn't do this and they fell short there. But God has done this. That's why I put the emphasis.
Yeah, the emphasis is on God's faithfulness. I think that's the point of that statement. And even though they haven't done everything they haven't been faithful to do everything God commanded them to do, they still are in the land and they are still dwelling there. Like that's overwhelmingly, I think, the emphasis of this. However, when you see that they didn't, like this part still wasn't conquered or this part didn't happen, it's God gave it to them. And why? I don't know. I feel like there'll be more passages to come where God will be like, why aren't you doing the thing that I want you to do this? Why haven't you done that? We've seen so many of those already. So, like I say, I'm not expecting, Mike, of this to fit in very naturally the way that, that you view it. I think that both of the views that we've presented are capable of understanding these. And so I'm not saying that my way of viewing it is better than yours, but I do read it. I do read it that way, and I think that those qualifying statements along the way go that God has been faithful, they haven't been, and I'm anticipating as we go forward from here, God will continue to be faithful, which includes bringing the curses and the consequences that He said because of their failure to do everything the way that they ought to have done it. That part I think we all agree on. So
yeah, there's maybe a hybrid view. I'm not sure that this settles everything, but this is it's a demerit, but it's only 2 chapters later, so it's not as bad of a demerit.
All
Does he
demerits
get
are
to
the
decide
same.
that?
No, they're all the same.
It's like a partial demerit because it's within the same book, and
it's a full
only 2
demerit.
chapters.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a full demerit.
Dang it! All right,
Go ahead and eat the plate.
Joshua 23, verses 4 and 5. See, I have apportioned to you these nations which remain as an inheritance for your tribes, with all the nations which I have cut off, from the Jordan even to the great sea toward the setting of the sun. The Lord your God, He will thrust them out from before you and drive them from before you, and you will take possession of their land, just as the Lord your God promised you. It sounds to me like what this is saying is that you have possession in the sense that you will have, if you obey, you will have full possession of this later on. It's kind of like you've taken the first huge step. Most of these nations are driven out. Yes, there's more to go, but you have possession in the sense that God will complete this for you. But again, that assumes they have to obey. It's conditional.
There is a lot of emphasis that we're placing on the word all, right? And maybe we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but if that word all hadn't been there, we would. I'm not even convinced we'd be talking about this passage. It'd be like, oh yeah, God gave him the land. So we're hanging a lot on that all, and so I would be interested to see, is there a grammatical reason why the stress that we're giving that word all is there?
It sounds like already but not yet language to me in Joshua 21. It sounds like he's saying, when I compare that verse with this verse, it makes it sound like it's almost like if before they even entered the land, God says, I'm giving you the land of Canaan. Like before they even had it, He's like, this is your inheritance. So you can say that something belongs to you, even if you don't have full possession of it, if there's the potential and even the certainty that you're going to possess that thing fully in the future.
If it's been deeded to you, in other words.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yep. So that's just some food for thought. All right, let's see. I got one more question on this is Joshua 22, kind of a little bit longer question. But when Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh came to the region of the Jordan, they built this altar, and thinking that it was done as an act of rebellion against the Lord, the rest of the tribes, they sent men to inquire about it because they thought that this was like idolatrous. So then Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, they explained that this was not done in rebellion, but for a witness, mentioned in verses 21 through 29. And their answer pleased the people that they sent. Then Phinehas the priest responds by saying, "Today we know that the Lord is in our midst because you have not committed this unfaithful act against the Lord." So what do you make of this statement? Does this mean that God prevented them from rebelling? Does it mean that their actions prevented God from punishing? Like, how do you understand this statement?
I don't think that I think that the answer is probably more likely. Today we know that the Lord is in our midst. Means there hasn't, we know that the Lord is in our midst because there hasn't been a breach of faith that would entail God's abandonment of us, for which we were about to basically, go at it with you guys over this whole thing. There hasn't been this breach of faith. Therefore, I think it's more likely that the emphasis is upon the fact that there hasn't been this kind of disobedience, and therefore, like, we know your loyalty is to the Lord, our loyalty is to the Lord. He's still in our midst, blessing us, etc. I think that's more natural within the text.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. I think I'd say something like this. Maybe this bakes into the grammar or not, but at least I think it's the idea. Today, because of this, we know the Lord is still here. God hasn't left our midst because of this idolatry, which he has promised. If you commit idolatry, we don't, you aren't going to enjoy this relationship should you turn away and worship false gods. And so this isn't about, this is proof, except this is proof that we haven't done anything wrong, so God is still in our midst, I guess is the way I would read it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree fully. I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, so it's not that God was keeping them from disobedience. It was their obedience was preventing God from abandoning them and punishing them. It's the way that, yeah, I would agree. That's the way that I saw it too.
They were keeping themselves in right relationship with God.
Yes.
I guess is the way I'd want to say that.
Yep. They had not broken the conditions of the covenant that were meant to maintain the presence of the Lord there.
Yes.
Right. Yep. Agreed.
I think we all read it the same, so I wouldn't go anywhere beyond that. Anybody else got anything else to add, or have we done it?
We're good.
We did it.
We are good.
All right. We did it. Well, that is our show on Joshua chapter. Boy, we had a big section, 13 to 22, and so that's what we think about it. There's a lot that we didn't bring up, so if you're still watching this and you have some questions or things to add or observations to make about either anything we did talk about or anything we didn't talk about, let us know in the comments below. We'd be delighted to read your comments there. We thank you for watching, and I thank you guys for your observations and your willingness to contribute to these conversations as we continue in our biblical theology project. I'll look forward to seeing you guys again next week, and you, our viewer, until we see you again, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
Anyway, you're welcome.